Que solo te dé alegría y no se te ponga malito nunca.
Ay, dice para que seas feliz y hagas feliz a tu dueño.
La está muy enfermo.
Bueno, yo te bendigo. Para que tú hagas feliz a tu dueña y la dueña te haga feliz a ti.
¿Puedes mandar una foto de la raza?
Welcome to Middle East Now. I'm Bianca Zanini. Let's start with tonight's headlines. The IDF launches a major counterterrorism operation in the city of Jenin in the West Bank, dubbing it Operation Iron Wall. US President Donald Trump kicks off his presidency by signing almost 100 executive orders, many directly influencing Israel and the Middle East. And could the Houthis in Yemen become Iran's main proxy in the region? The IDF has launched a major counterterrorism operation in the northern West Bank city of Jenin, dubbed Operation Iron Wall. The raid reportedly began with a series of targeted drone strikes in Jenin earlier today and is expected to last several days. The Palestinian Authority Health Ministry reports 8 people dead and 35 wounded so far. The operation was launched a day after an Israeli reservist soldier was killed in the West Bank and 4 others were wounded. The Palestinian Authority's own security forces left the area beforehand, following a month-long operation of its own against local Palestinian terror groups. And we go now live to Joe Brown, I-24 News correspondent, with us from the Gilboa checkpoint in the West Bank. Joe, what do we know about this latest operation, the scope of it, the size of it, and what are you hearing there on the ground?
Yeah, so earlier today, just a couple miles down south from me, behind me, the IDF launched Operation Iron Wall. This doesn't come as a major surprise. The Chief of Staff, Halevi, did mention that there was going to be a major counter-terrorism operation going on in the West Bank over the coming days, and this is what we saw earlier today. The Palestinian Authority forces were in the Jenin refugee camp over the last month to try and stop the rise in terror. They had been attacked by the Jenin Battalion, which is a group of a localized group of Islamist militants, not specifically linked to one terror organization. There are members of Hamas and there are members of Palestinian Islamic Jihad involved. And the IDF believed that the PA had failed in their operation. There was actually a ceasefire last week, a very brief ceasefire that was broken after one day. And this isn't even mentioning the terror attack in Kedumim on the 6th of January, in which 3 Israelis were killed. But the IDF went in today to replace the PA forces. They started off with airstrikes and ground incursions simultaneously. There are around about 400 combatants there in the battalion who they are fighting. According to the latest figures from the Palestinian Health Ministry, they say that 8 people have been killed in these clashes and 35 have been wounded. We're still somewhat in the fog of war right now, so we don't know every single detail right now, but we do expect this operation to last for at least a couple days, maybe even pushing on to a week.
All right, Joe Brown, live with us from the border with the West Bank. Thank you so much. Now, joining me in the studio is retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Neria, former Deputy Head of Assessment at the Israeli Military Intelligence, as well as former Foreign Policy Advisor to Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Very impressive titles.
Yeah, thank you.
I want you to take a step back with us here and look at not just this IDF operation, but the previous Palestinian Authority operation in that same area that lasted almost a month. How did that come about, and why did they end up leaving and then the IDF essentially taking over?
As usual, the Palestinian Authority talks a lot and does very little, and especially in in the military confrontation with Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. They were unable to advance, even to penetrate the refugee camp. And it means a lot. I mean, after months of fighting, they were at the same place and they just failed. And this is why Israel's spy agencies are well aware of an Iranian effort to try to infiltrate and penetrate the area, especially in association with Hamas. And this is the big danger, or I would say the big nightmare that Israel has, that something of the 7th of October could be replicated in the West Bank. And this is why Israel has taken the advanced move and to operate in Jenin, trying to grab as much as possible terrorists and kill them there, instead of them carrying terrorist activities or actions against villages and settlements, Israeli settlements in the West Bank. And this is, as I said, the biggest nightmare that Israel has today. This is why we see that the army has sent reinforcement, very sizable reinforcements that were taken from the north and from the south. And I mean, we can't fight all the time on three fronts, so we have to take, I mean, to maneuver with manpower. And this move was enabled because of the ceasefire that we are witnessing right now in Gaza and in Lebanon. As I said, but this is only a beginning. It has to be all the time on the run, and Israel has to pursue this sort of activities. Otherwise, terrorism will just wake up and hit us hard, certainly in settlements.
Right, I want to ask you about this because you're saying it's just the beginning, but it's really not the beginning. I mean, the IDF has been operating in that area really for years, and the intensity of it has only been growing. Why is it not helping? Why is it not getting better? Why do we need an operation like this after so long?
There's no foreign power has succeeded in any place in the world, whereas the population is a safe haven for terrorists. We saw that in Vietnam, we saw that in Cambodia, we saw that in Europe. I mean, as long as the population is part of this haven, then there is a difficulty in overcoming this problem. So the recruitment is still there. Money flows in from Iran and from other sources, and this fuels, I mean, the recruitment effort. And there are more recruits that joined the terrorist organization than those who are killed. I mean, after an operation like today, you have 8 Palestinians killed. And I can assure you that you have at least 20 new Palestinians recruits in the Islamic Jihad.
Right, and you're talking about a foreign power, in this case, the IDF, a foreign power. But we had the Palestinian Authority themselves in there for a month. And they also failed.
I understand your question, and allow me to make a remark here. For years, the Israeli government under Netanyahu has tried to weaken the Palestinian Authority as much as possible, and in fact, it has emasculated the Palestinian Authority to such a point that they don't have the power near the units or the efforts to take care of that problem. Remember, a few years ago, when we had a security cooperation with the Palestinian Authority and with our spy agency, terrorism was not on the rise in the West Bank. Terrorism was subdued. And by the moment we decided that to depart from the Palestinian Authority and to weaken the Palestinian Authority, this is what happens.
All right. Stay with us. Now, IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Halevi, has announced his resignation after taking responsibility for the failures of the IDF on October 7th. In a bombshell announcement, Halevi said that he will resign on March 6th after the first stage of the ceasefire with Hamas is completed. Now, the IDF's head of the Southern Command, Major General Yaron Finkelman, has also announced his resignation today over his role in the failures that led to Hamas' attack on Israel and the IDF response. Halevi is expected to address the nation at any moment, and we will be taking his speech live for you. So we'll be back with that in a few moments. Now, 4 days into the ceasefire and hostages deal between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, Israelis are still celebrating the return of the first 3 hostages. Emily Damari, Doron Steinbrecher and Romy Gonen, released last Sunday from Hamas captivity. But many are also looking ahead anxiously for this coming Saturday, when Hamas is said to release the next 4 female hostages in return for a number of Palestinian prisoners. 94 hostages remain in Gaza, and 30 hostages are expected to be released in the next 6 weeks, the first phase of the deal. An emotional roller coaster awaits as we still don't know how many of them are alive. But the 3 young women released just 4 days ago are currently being treated in Tel Aviv after being reunited with their families. And we go now live to Sheba Medical Center in Tel Aviv, where I-24 News' Balir Sladin is with us live. Balir, any updates there from the 3 patients or their families?
Well, we are yet to receive any updates this day on the conditions of Doron and Emily and Romy today. But yesterday, their families came to here in order to give an update on their condition. And Doron's sister said that she is doing well, she is strong and brave, but the road to recovery is still long. The same thing we are hearing also from Romy's mother and the other family of the 3rd hostage that returned from Gaza. Of course, they have been in a very dire condition in Gaza, mostly not seeing even daylight, but apparently they have been returned in a relatively good condition, although that Emily, for example, has lost 2 of her fingers, but she has been treated in one way or another in Gaza, and now she is being, of course, examined in Israel with continuous medical care and psychological care as well, which is the most important, I guess.
All right, Balir Sladin live with us from Sheba Medical Center in Tel Aviv. We'll be following updates from that hospital. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump signed close to 100 executive orders as soon as his inauguration was finalized, wasting no time setting his agenda, including on the Middle East and Israel, amid its war with Hamas in Gaza. Emmanuel Honora has more.
How confident are you, Mr. President, that you can keep the ceasefire in Gaza and conclude the 3 phases of the deal?
I'm not confident. That's not our war, it's their war, but I'm not confident. But I think they're very weakened on the other side.
That didn't stop now President Donald Trump from signing multiple executive orders that could impact directly or indirectly the status of the Israel-Hamas ceasefire. With little doubt as to which so-called side Trump is on, he signed 5 executive orders relating to Israel. One of the more notable executive orders Trump signed was the reversal of sanctions on Israeli settlers in the West Bank, something the Biden administration had placed great emphasis on during its tenure, concerned that it would destabilize the West Bank even more at such a sensitive time, but also U.S. interests. Far-right Israeli parties in the government support this move as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu plays a delicate balancing act between keeping his coalition satisfied while still securing a hostage ceasefire deal. Trump also restored sanctions on the International Criminal Court after the Biden administration reversed those same sanctions under Trump's previous term. This comes as the ICC issued arrest warrants in November for both the Israeli Prime Minister and the now former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. In another move, Trump placed a 90-day pause on U.S. assistance to foreign developmental programs to allow for the time to review their alignments to the new administration's policy, signaling in this case that it won't start up funding for organizations such as UNRWA after Biden signed a bill in March banning U.S. funding for the organization. And after months on calling for the deportation of, quote, pro-Hamas radicals, Trump authorized exactly that, for visa holders who support what the administration deems hateful ideologies, terrorism, or national security threats to be sent back to where they came from.
Now back with me in the studio is Dr. Jack Neria. Trump said Monday that he wasn't confident that this ceasefire will hold. He even said it's their war. That said, we know he doesn't want to see a restart of the war. And the truth is, if the war does restart, suddenly it's going to be his responsibility. He can't point to another administration. He's going to be in power.
I must recognize that from my conversations with some of the Trump team a few weeks ago, I could understand that he couldn't care less of what happens with Hamas. He would like to see Hamas eliminated, eradicated, and at any price done by Israel, and as soon as possible, and if possible, without American intervention. This is my view, and this is my interpretation of what we heard yesterday in the Oval Office. It means very clearly that, he says, okay, Israel, you have a green light, do whatever you want.
All right, so I just want to break in here right now. We are expecting to hear from Halevi right now. You can see him live on our screen.
But it also has great accomplishments for our future. We are still fighting in the IDF in the various arenas. We are still realizing some of the goals of the war, the most important goals, which is returning the hostages. The forces, as I have been impressed in my visits with them, are very determined and know what they are fighting for. Dismantling Hamas, its governing and military capabilities, returning the hostages, and returning the citizens of Israel to their homes safely. In other arenas that are further away, the IDF continues to take action in full force. I am currently near Mefalsim, the place where many were murdered and where many were abducted from. In this very place, I choose to speak about the situation as well as about myself. On the day when a person takes upon themselves to be a commander in the IDF, they take upon themselves responsibility, a responsibility that has no expiry date. On the first day of the war, in the assessment, I very loudly took responsibility, my own responsibility, for the IDF's failure to defend the civilians on the 7th of October. That is what I did also on the 6th day of the war, publicly. The main aim of the IDF is to protect citizens of Israel, and we have failed to do so. And the outcomes of that terrible day I have been bearing since then and will continue to bear for the rest of my life. During my various positions in the IDF, I was educated that an operation ends when the goal is achieved. An operation ends when everyone goes back home. An operation ends when an investigation has taken place. And we need to do that in order to learn whether the force failed or succeeded. And back at the beginning of the war, we initiated in the IDF an inquiry that took place unprecedentedly during the war. The desire and need to balance between the attention of the commanders that are leading the fighting and the availability needed from them to investigate and inquire are faithful to the truth and to the facts, and that required a long process. October 7th was a day where the fighting was in many places and centers and was complicated. The desire of the bereaved families to discover the truth and investigate these events as quickly as possible is understandable and important to us. The IDF must provide answers. We must inquire thoroughly and very transparently. We investigate and inquire because we are committed to the fallen, to the hostages and their families, and to the communities of the Western Negev. We are inquiring out of our duty to learn, and in a way that will allow us to better protect Israel's citizens in the future. The full findings I will present to the Minister of Defense and, wherever possible, to the citizens of Israel. And mostly we will learn and assimilate them in the IDF in order to improve and strengthen our capabilities. I can say very safely right now that no one has concealed information, no one knew what was going to happen, no one helped the enemy to execute their evil and cruelty. Such statements not only are not true, but they really hurt people who have been serving so well and are doing so much to protect this country and understand their responsibility in light of the outcomes. Once these inquiries and investigations will be completed, we will know better to say what happened, why it happened, and how we can fix it. The IDF investigation only looks at the IDF and does not encompass all the reasons and areas and aspects that could prevent such a thing from ever happening again. And a commission of inquiry or any other organization or body will be able to inquire, and they will get full transparency from the IDF. I have responsibility for the IDF's failure. I am responsible also for the accomplishments. I will say ahead of time, I wish we didn't have to accomplish these things, and no accomplishment will ever turn back the grief and a terrible loss that have been caused since this war began. An army is an organization that is aimed for emergency times. It is tested by being able to work along with surprises, and we have failed in protecting. IDF commanders and various officials in the defense establishment have done everything in their power to minimize the damage, to curb and to stop. We went out to war. It's a tough war. The arenas accumulated. The IDF brought in this war under my command, together with my friends in the staff of the IDF, many accomplishments. The IDF planned, the IDF put to practice. The Middle East has changed. Our map of threats has completely changed. Opportunities emerged, and we must always assess the risks as well. Hezbollah has been defeated. Most of its leadership has been eliminated. We killed over 4,000 terror activists, among them most of the chain of command, the most senior chain of command of the organization, headed by Hassan Nasrallah. These are outcomes that are due to good planning, brave initiatives, doing things in air, on land, and in sea, and with other supporting agencies. It is also the result of very top-quality intelligence. Those people that have failed in intelligence on October 7th and feel that have brought the intelligence that allowed for these accomplishments too. Hezbollah's weakening in the area and in Lebanon is apparent, and we must preserve that in the future. Hamas military arm has also been impacted. Most of the leadership has been killed, headed by Yahya Sinwar. The same is true for the senior officials of the military arm, which headed by Muhammad F. 20,000 terror Hamas activists have been killed. We have not had all of our hostages returned, and we have other missions to complete vis-a-vis the Hamas governing capabilities and also their guerrilla activities, and we are determined to defeat them. In fighting terror over the last year, many civilians and soldiers were killed in the West Bank too. At the beginning of the war, we killed 794 terrorists in that area. We tried to preempt evil before the terrorists reached Israel. This is a broad effort that has taken place in collaboration with the ISA, a top-quality organization that has joined forces with us and responsibly and in a learning curve continues to work with us. Terrorism in the West Bank could have been much more significant in this war if it weren't for our attack and defense initiatives. In this war, we fought directly for the first time against Iran. We targeted its proxies in the region, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Iranian Axis's assets in Syria. We worked in order to protect, and we used airstrikes in order to impact the Axis's capabilities, and that has changed the threat that comes from Syria. We targeted Iran because of their missile attacks targeted at Israel and because of drones that were sent to us on 2 nights, and using the Israeli Air Force based on very high-quality intelligence and with strategic and brave collaborations and defense moves that have minimized the damage. No one was killed during these attacks. Very few were injured. We did have some damage to property. This in view of hundreds of tons of ammunition that was launched at Israel. And for that, we attacked Iran. We knew exactly where we were striking and why. Our ammunition hit exactly the right target and demolished it wherever we wanted it to be. We know now that Iran knows what our force is, how strong we are, and they will continue to feel how strong we are if needed. These IDF accomplishments position Israel in a different light here in the region and around the world, both with respect to October 7th, but also with respect to what was happening before the war began. This has great significance, and we will need to maintain these accomplishments, even in the way that we perceive our actions in the future. Never will these accomplishments alleviate the loss and pain, but they will allow us to establish a better future for all of us. The transition between the terrible failure and these accomplishments was full of difficulties and required much force and much talent. I am very proud of the IDF for getting back on its feet, for the way and its outcomes. I'm proud of the commanders and the reservists, all the different soldiers and the civilians who work for us. I have no desire to hang on to my position. From a value-based perspective, it is not right for my term to be completed. And that is what I've said in the past. It is the right time to make decisions. I am investing everything I have in the war, have been for 473 days, in order to make sure that Hamas will be eliminated from a governing and military capability perspective, in order to return the hostages and in order to allow those who lived in the north and in the western Negev to their homes. Today, I have told the Prime Minister and Minister of Defense of my desire to deliver on my responsibility to end my term in office on March 6th. Until then, we will complete all the investigations and all the urgent missions, and I will pass on command over the IDF thoroughly and responsibly to any of the candidates that will be appointed to replace me. Very soon, I will complete 40 years of military service. I have always seen the needs of the IDF and Israel before me. They were so important, much more than me. And that's the same is true now. This decision has been made by me a long time ago. But now that the IDF is reigning supreme and another hostage deal is underway, it is the right time. I have decided to wait with this statement several weeks. I thought that it's not the right thing to do, to talk about myself and about ending this position when the fate of the hostages is still in the balance, hanging, and the families don't know enough. And when the Gaza fighting is still going on, when so many are still sacrificing their lives. I would like to strengthen the families of the hostages and their anticipation and their expectancy and their long wait. I want them to know that we are doing everything in our power. I would like to embrace the bereaved families, and I would like to salute the wounded and strengthen them as they recover. During the entire war, since October 7th, I have looked at the failure head on. I did not try to avoid my responsibility, and I did not forget for a single moment that I am the commander who sent his soldiers to the battle from which they never returned, and to the positions from which they were taken. And I would like to bow my head low in memory of the civilians that we did not manage to save, and our fellow fighters in the Rapid Response Unit and in the various IDF units, men and women in reserve and regular duty who withstood their positions and did not abandon them. I had the right and the privilege and the honor of being the commander of the IDF to face the failure, but to turn it into a lever instead of a weight, and to lead Israel and its people to a safer reality for many years to come. And these are the names of the people of Israel. That is the next section, next portion of the Torah we will be reading this Shabbat. These are the names we will never forget. Those we will never forget because they are no longer here, and those we are waiting for their return. May they all return.
All right, IDF Chief of Staff, General Halevi, announcing his resignation live there. Now, back in the studio with me is Dr. Jacques Neria. We knew this was coming, and yet a bombshell announcement. The IDF chief of staff announced his resignation, taking responsibility, and yet, as we heard here, trying to leave with a certain amount of honor and grace at the same time. What do you make of this?
Well, first of all, we have to remember that this is the first resignation ever of a chief of staff in the Israeli army. I mean, since 1948, this is the first one who resigns. I mean, from his own decision, not being asked to resign like Elazar after the Yom Kippur War, and after others also failed in their duties. But what is surprising here is the timing. Why I'm saying timing? Because we are at the eve of major events. Next week, beginning next week, we have this the ceasefire. The 60 days set by for the ceasefire in Lebanon are ending. So what will happen next? and Hezbollah is warming the engines, saying that he will fight Israel if Israel is not withdrawing from Lebanon. Then, if we look at Gaza, we have a deal, and this deal is very complicated. On day 16, there have to be the beginning of the next phase, and it seems that the Prime Minister has promised Smotrich and others that in case we don't advance, and we have an okay from the American administration, that we can go back again to war. So in this atmosphere where you have a possibility of war in the south and a possibility of war in the north, you have suddenly a resignation. And this is what's stunning here. And the timing is, you can only think of why did he do that now? And in my view, he is blocking the decision of the government to try to go to the next phase of opening the war. For me, it is the end of the war. This is, the new team that will be chosen is not fit, in my view, to enter the shoes of this chief of staff and to wage the war, to continue the continuation of the war. Right. It has to take some time. So this means that Israel will have to wait a bit for the next phase, be it, negotiate an extension of the ceasefire in Lebanon, for instance, and trying to negotiate a sort of deal with Hamas, knowing that at the end of the deal, finally, we can be when all our hostages are back, we are just free again to act against Hamas. This is my view.
Well, we'll certainly have to see. We know that Finance Minister Smotrich has already said that the next guy will have to be ready to go back into war in Gaza. Now, moving on, at his first rally since being sworn in as president, Donald Trump told the families of the hostages being held in Gaza that Israel would never have been hit on October 7th if he had been in office, and that he would have deprived Iran of the money needed to aid not only Hamas, but also Hezbollah and its other proxies. Now, joining me is Jason Brodsky, Policy Director at United Against Nuclear Iran. Jason, thank you so much for joining us this evening. What does he mean he would have deprived Iran of the money? He left the nuclear deal and imposed a maximum pressure campaign on Iran. Is that it?
Well, it's great to be with you. I think what the president is referring to is that the Biden administration was very lax at enforcing the sanctions that President Trump reimposed after he left the nuclear deal. And that provided resources for the Iranian regime to spread to Hamas and Hezbollah and other proxies and partners in Tehran's axis of resistance network. That made October 7th and the events afterwards possible. So there is a logic and a strategic logic to depriving the Iranians of funds and the resources needed for them to foment this mayhem in the region. All right.
Well, that said, though, whether or not leaving the JCPOA was a good idea, the reality is that since Trump left in 2018, Iran has only moved closer to producing nuclear weapons. Is it likely that he can or will do whatever it takes to prevent that from continuing?
What it's going to take to continue that from progressing is a whole of government strategy that's focused on diplomatic, informational, military, and economic pressure against the Islamic Republic. It has to be long-lasting, and it has to be decisive and strategic, and also multilateral in nature. I think the United States has a strategic opportunity now with Europe willing to do more to hold the Iranian regime accountable, especially after Iran's arming of Russia against Ukraine, and to join European and Asian partners in forming a countering Iran coalition to get to that pressure architecture that the president has been speaking about and the senior advisors have been speaking about.
All right, so that's one route to take. What are the chances of another route, a revival of the JCPOA or a similar deal? What do you see the chances of that happening under Trump?
The Iranian leadership is trying to lure the U.S. government and the Trump administration into another series of endless negotiations. I think that the Iranian leadership is only really speaking in the formula and the framework of the JCPOA. They are willing to trade that formula of sanctions for caps on its nuclear program, and that failed in the past. It collapsed because there wasn't bipartisan support for that framework in the United States, and also Iran's non-nuclear behavior will inevitably destabilize any kind of nuclear understanding that the United States and Iran reach. So that's why some people have been saying that there's an opportunity for a broader deal, especially after Iran's setbacks in the region. But I'm deeply skeptical the Iranian leadership is in that space right now. And that is why the United States needs to foment a pressure campaign with its allies to get the Iranians to sharpen their choices.
And how far do you think the U.S. can go with this pressure campaign? U.S. imposed sanctions. How much damage can they do? How much pressure can they put on Iran?
Well, right now, I think we're at a very strategic moment. The Iranian regime has been weakened really to unprecedented levels in recent history. And so this provides an opening for the United States to work closely with its allies in potentially military strikes against Iran's nuclear program. Let's not forget Israel was very successful in striking Iranian soil twice over the last year, and it did not trigger a large-scale war. In fact, diplomats now admit that it produced a ceasefire. So that's the essence of President Trump's peace through strength organizing principle of his foreign policy. And I would hope that they would consider the need for a credible military threat against Iran's nuclear program to be part of his Iran strategy, because that's overdue, and it has been a core weakness of U.S. policy on Iran for decades.
All right, Jason Brodsky, thank you very much for your insight, for your analysis this evening.
Thank you.
Back with me in the studio. So, a new U.S. administration. How is Israel positioning itself? I mean, it's not just going to sit back and trust that Trump will do the right thing, but at the same time, there has to be some level of playing room and showing Trump that there is trust between the Israeli and the American government.
This is the question: trust. Trust comes from past experience, and Netanyahu remembers very well that in January 2020. When the United States hit Qasem Soleimani and eliminated him, I mean, Trump came afterwards and blamed Netanyahu that at the last moment he just refused to cooperate with the U.S. and it was only a U.S. action against the Qasem Soleimani, and because of that he was in fact he became the victim or the sort of the target of killing by the Iranians. So I mean And Trump said very clearly that Netanyahu tried to take advantage of the credit, but it's okay with him. It's okay. I mean, we know that. So it's a question of trust. So before entering, and now that Trump says very clearly, I don't want to wage wars. It means that you won't see boots, American boots in Iran. This will not happen. So what is the other alternative? Other is striking the nuclear facilities, but this will come only after exhausting, I would say, all the efforts concerning diplomatic solutions,
the sanctions,
and the sanctions and so on. And I mean, and we know that the sanctions that the Trump administration imposed on Iran were very biting ones and very hard ones for the Iranians. And it was, I mean, these were sanctions released by the Biden administration. And let us not forget that the Obama administration gave millions and billions of dollars to Iran, which allowed Iran to expand its hegemony all over the Middle East. So this is the crux. I mean, this is what the American administration certainly will do. Will try to negotiate with Iran a new deal, but a firm one with definitely, I mean, some guarantees that will be enough for the Trump administration. If not, the flow of sanctions will fall on Iran, and if not, it will end up at attacking the nuclear facilities. This will happen in the next two phases.
All right, stay with us, Jacques. In Syria, the country's new leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, said that he is confident that Donald Trump will be the leader to bring peace to the Middle East. In a statement, al-Sharaa congratulated the American president and said he looks forward to improving relations between the two countries. Now, Syria's leader was once a member of al-Qaeda, if you remember, and he renounced ties back in 2016. And since then, he has been working, especially recently, on appearing more moderate and more democratic. Now, joining the conversation from Washington, D.C., is Hadil Ouis, editor-in-chief at Jusor News. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Al-Sharaa is trying to present a moderate image, a relatively moderate image of his new Syrian government. Now, a central goal for him is for the U.S. and the EU, for that matter, to lift the U.S. sanctions on the new government. Tell us about what this statement means in relation to that.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And that was the first official statement by the new Syrian government in English. They made it specially to congratulate President Trump. Of course, they want to have bridges with the United States, with the new American administration. I know that al-Sharaa has been meeting with a lot of Syrian Americans during the last few months and weeks, and they are advising him to try to send positive signals to the new administration, try to make sure that he sent the right messages, that he's keen to collaborate with them. A few days ago, he met with the mother of Austin Tice, the American prisoner who disappeared under the Assad regime in Syria. The government of al-Sharaa is saying that they are working hard to find him. We know that at the beginning of their arrival to Damascus, they also found another American detainee, and they give him back to the U.S. administration. They are trying. They want, of course, the sanctions to be lifted. They want to gain the trust of the new American administration. They want positive relations. We heard today, I was just reading an interview with the defense minister, the new defense minister of Syria, and he is also assuring that Syria can't afford any new wars, any new fronts, not with players inside Syria and not with neighboring countries.
Now, Trump is going to have to make some tough choices in Syria. There are some 2,000 U.S. troops in Syria, a number much higher than was known before. And there are reports that ISIS has been able to seize weapons from the previous government amid the chaos of Assad's fall, and that it is in fact growing in strength. What do you expect to see from Trump in Syria?
I know that Trump wants to end this presence in Syria, especially when the leader of SDF, Muslim Abdi, goes out and say that stability in northeast Syria is related to the U.S. presence. That's a message that President Trump can read as that there is a need to keep the U.S. forces forever in Syria to maintain stability. So President Trump wants to see a plan for the withdrawal of U.S. forces and maintaining stability in northeast Syria. He has close relations with Erdogan. I think President Erdogan is working hard to convince President Trump to withdraw the forces from northeast Syria. But also we know that some people in the Trump administration, like Marco Rubio, are very keen to protect the Kurdish partners who fought ISIS along with the United States. So I think it will take some time until we see the U.S. withdraw from Syria, but I think we'll see it under President Trump.
Interesting. Now, Syria's representative to the UN Security Council has asked the UN to instruct Israel to withdraw from areas on the Syrian Golan Heights. What more do we know about this, and what does it signal at a time like this?
I think it's a symbolic move. Al-Shara and his administration tried to ignore or try to avoid any confrontation with Israel, whether it is, of course, military confrontation or even diplomatic or political confrontation. He even tried for some time not to condemn the Israeli recent attacks on the Syrian territories. But I noticed that we started to see these moves by the new Syrian government after a meeting, senior meeting between Al-Shara and the foreign minister of Qatar. I think Qatar is encouraging the new Syrian government to condemn the Israeli attacks, to talk about the Golan Heights. It all remains symbolic moves because the Syrian government is insisting that they don't want any conflict with Israel. And they are also protecting the Syrian borders with all the neighboring countries, including Israel, to ensure that there are no attacks from any radical groups, whether it is Sunni groups or Iran-backed group on Israel or Jordan or any other countries.
All right, Hadil Uwais, thank you so much for joining us this evening and giving us your insights.
Thank you.
Now, back in the studio with me here, I want to ask you, Israel has said that its true presence in Syria is temporary. What are they waiting for?
Well, we're waiting for a consolidation of the regime, of stability. I mean, Israel is looking for stability in Syria. Israel hates instability in the Middle East. In every place where there's instability, you have problems of terrorism. You have an intrusion and involvement of Iranian terrorists in the area. So I mean, the most important element is stability. And as long as this government, now the Al-Shara government, is not stable, he is fighting to unite the country. On the one hand, he has the Kurds who are controlling 1/3 of the territory. You have the Alawites on the northwest area in Latakia, near the Turkish border, who are, I mean, almost independent. And then you have the Druze, and then you have the Sunnis, you have the Assyrians, and you have the Chaldites and others. I mean, this is a puzzle that is very difficult to put together, and he is right now busy in trying to find a common ground for a common denominator between everybody in order to unite Syria. And because Syria of today is not united, it's just broken in parts. And certainly there's an intention of Turkey to do some more occupation into Syrian territory.
And how big of a worry is that for Israel, specifically Turkey's influence?
But the Turkish involvement is in the northern part of Syria. It's along the Kurdish areas and along the Idlib area. So it has nothing to do with Israel. I don't think that basically we are
it depends on how much influence
we are
Turkey
overreacting.
We are
overreacting about the Turkish threat. There's a huge problem between Turks and Arabs. They hate one another historically.
The Turks also don't like the Israelis that much.
But I mean, I'm afraid that maybe I'm the only one who just heralding a different situation. I don't believe that will be a situation where we'll see Turkish soldiers on our border. This is not acceptable to the Syrians. And if this happens, then Al-Shara will not be standing in his regime.
All right, stay with us, Shak. Now, the implementation of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza is, of course, already causing ripple effects through the region. Now, earlier this week, Yemen's Houthi rebels announced that they will limit their attacks in the Red Sea corridor to only Israeli-affiliated ships. The Iran-backed terror group has targeted over 100 merchant vessels since the beginning of the war in Gaza, cutting the traffic through the Red Sea in half and deeply affecting transport and trade in the region and Egypt's revenues from the Suez Canal in particular. Now, joining me from London is Catherine Perez-Shakdam, an expert on Iran, Yemen, and radical movements, and the executive director at the Forum for Foreign Relations. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. The Houthis today thanked Iran for their support in, quote, defeating Israel in Gaza, sending a message highlighting the increasingly close relationship between Tehran and the group. Now, with the increased number of attacks we've seen this past year in the Red Sea, but also against Israel, especially in the last weeks, are the Houthis trying to position themselves to become Iran's main proxy in the region now that Hezbollah is weakened, Hamas is weakened?
I think it's not just the main proxy in the region. I think it's the only one left. I think that's a better point to make in that the Islamic Republic of Iran doesn't have many fronts left in the fray, and so it's relying on the Houthis. Now, the advantage that the Houthi feel they have is that of geography, is that they understand that Israel will not easily send boots on the ground, if at all, and that, of course, by limiting its attack to the Red Sea, it's hoping not to get President Trump to be too angry at them, or at least to limit whatever action they may feel to take. So I think that they're protecting themselves somehow and minimizing the impact that it may have on Yemen. And also bearing in mind that I don't think that they understand quite well exactly just what happened to Hezbollah and Hamas and others in the region, including Syria. They don't understand that the IDF and Israel, of course, is absolutely determined to defend its borders and not willing to risk anything anymore, that it's taking everything when it comes to the threat leveled by the Islamic Republic and its proxies very seriously indeed, and that repercussion will be met. And so the Houthis are trying their luck, I feel. They're trying to remain relevant. They're trying to see if maybe they could broker a deal with President Trump, imagining that President Trump does not want to expand military intervention in the Middle East, and that the new president that just got into the White House yesterday will not want to start something with the Islamic Republic. And so I think it's a game of cat and mouse right now. So let's just see what happens. But I think they're going to be very, very supportive of what may happen to them. I don't think that the White House today is the White House of yesterday, and I don't think President Trump will be willing to let them do whatever it is that they want. So we'll see.
And you're saying they're trying to keep their relevance and that they perhaps don't understand what they're actually facing. But on the other side, they are a very aggressive force and has become even more aggressive. How much of a threat, realistically, are the Houthis to the security of the region?
I don't think it's a threat necessarily to the security percent. But I think that the reach that they have is very limited. That said, of course, they're attacking the Red Sea, which means that they are directly impacting the world oil route and the passages of couriers. So it's going to impact trade worldwide. That is something that, of course, could cause enormous economic strife. That said, again, the Houthis are trying to leverage, and it's something that is typical to, I would say, trouble Yemen. They're trying to leverage their position. They want to position themselves as a party that could harm, and therefore they want to encourage negotiation to be done on their terms as opposed to come to the table as losers. This is the way that they're looking at things. And this is something that is very typical to Yemen. I think there's a cultural element that we may want to take into account.
All right, Catherine, you're also the executive director for the organization We Believe in Israel. You have just released a policy briefing outlining the need for reform to protect British nationals detained abroad, named after Emily Damari. Tell us a little bit more here shortly before we end the show.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much. We're very proud of the Emily Damari provision. What we're calling for is for the UK government to make consular aid to be mandatory. This is not the case today, and we feel it's appalling. It means that hundreds of people every year at risk in foreign countries, whether they are dual nationals or only just British citizens, are at risk of being ignored by the British government. And we're so very happy that Emily is home, but we feel that it wasn't due to the efforts of the British government and Prime Minister Keir Starmer, but rather that of President Trump. And so we feel that there's a change of law that needs to take place. We are very proud to be promoting this, to be championing this, and we're hoping that the British people, as well as politicians, MPs and peers, will be backing us as much as they can. We feel it's necessary, it's needed, and it will benefit the British people as a whole, and we're very proud to put Emily's name to it.
All right, Catherine Perez-Shakdam, thank you very much for joining us this evening, giving us your insight and your analysis. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Take care, you guys.
Now, 2 American citizens held by the Taliban have been released in return for an Afghan man convicted on charges of terrorism and drug smuggling in the U.S. More details in this report.
Khan Muhammad, a convicted Afghan drug smuggler and Taliban member, is back in Kabul after spending more than 15 years in U.S. prison. Mohammed was sentenced to life imprisonment in 2008, making him the first person convicted under American narco-terrorism laws. The Department of Justice described Mohammed as a violent jihadist who sought to target US soldiers in Afghanistan using rockets. His release is part of a prisoner exchange deal with the Taliban, in which 2 American citizens, Ryan Corbett and William McEntee, have been freed from detention. Ryan Corbett, detained by the Taliban since 2022, ran an NGO called Bloom Afghanistan, focused on boosting the private sector. McEntee's family has reportedly asked the US government to keep his details private. Afghanistan's foreign ministry praised the agreement as a step toward normalizing ties with the United States.
The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan considers this exchange as a good example of resolving issues through dialogue, and is particularly grateful to the fraternal state of Qatar for its effective role in this regard. The Islamic Emirate views positively the steps taken by the United States that aid normalization and expansion of relations between the 2 countries.
The deal was reportedly finalized in the final hours of Joe Biden's presidency before Donald Trump took office. Corbett's family thanked both administrations for securing his release, but lamented that 2 other Americans, George Glesman and Mahmoud Habibi, remain detained in Afghanistan.
All right, and I want to thank retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Nerian, former deputy head of assessment at the Israeli military intelligence, as well as former foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. That is all we have time for in this broadcast, but Middle East Now will be back tomorrow with more news and analysis from Israel and the region. I'm Bianca Zanini. Thank you for watching.
This innovative tool is the Fat Freezer Platinum, the first home-use fat reduction device that freezes away stubborn fat.
Like most people, I always believed that diet and exercise would be enough to reduce stubborn fat.
The Fat Freezer Platinum uses technology to freeze away stubborn fat from the comfort of your own home. To optimize results, the Fat Freezer Platinum uses TheraLight. The Fat Freezer Platinum will help you sculpt your body in exactly the way you want and keep it that way. It's safe, simple to use, and bottom line is, it really works. The Fat Freezer uses a medically known technology called cryolipolysis, used in high-end clinics all across the globe.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Segundo verbo, os metais e da tecnologia. Esse grande é tradição.
The IDF launches a large-scale counter-terrorism operation in the West Bank. Our correspondent on the ground brings us the latest details in a live report. And IDF Chief of Staff Halevi says he is going to resign over the October 7th failures that happened under his watch. We'll discuss the impact his decision could have on other Israeli leaders who have yet to take responsibility for the state's darkest day. Plus, on his first day back in the White House, U.S. President Donald Trump signed dozens of executive orders, several of them which could impact Israel and its war efforts. Our senior U.S. correspondent has an update from Washington. This is a rundown on I-24 News. I'm Nicole Zedek. Thanks for joining us this evening. As phase one of the ceasefire holds in Gaza, the Israeli military is focusing on another front, the West Bank. The IDF announced a new operation called Iron Wall, a large-scale counterterrorism operation in the West Bank city of Jenin, with special forces, Shin Bet agents, and border police officers. In a statement from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office, the premier said, quote, "We are operating in a systematic and decisive way against the Iranian access wherever it sends its arms, in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Judea and Samaria," referring to the West Bank as its biblical name. And that's where we go now for an update. Our I-24 News correspondent Joe Brown is live at the Gilboa checkpoint in the West Bank. Joe, this large-scale operation, what details can you tell us about the IDF's moves so far?
Well, at around about the late morning today, the IDF launched the Operation Iron Wall to try and solve the rising terror issue in the Jenin refugee camp. It started off with some airstrikes whilst there was a ground incursion. And alongside these airstrikes, this gave the IDF ability to have a look at Jenin from an aerial view. Bear in mind, this is a very compact and densely populated refugee camp, so these aerial views gave an idea of the very narrow streets of Jenin. We know that the IDF were fighting against around about 400 people from the Jenin Battalion, which is a local Islamist organization. It's not specifically linked to one terror group. It has members who are affiliated with Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad, but they have all joined together to fight what was originally the Palestinian Authority forces, who have been in battle with them for the best part of the last month. However, the IDF deemed that they were not doing their job efficiently. There was a brief ceasefire last week that only lasted for a day before fighting resumed, and there was a terror attack on January the 6th in Kedumim in which 3 Israelis were killed. So the IDF feel that the Palestinian Authority weren't doing enough. So now that the ceasefire in Gaza is seemingly holding up, there has been more movement and more manpower that has been available so that the IDF can focus on this operation. It will most likely last for a couple of days, maximum a week, but it will take however long it needs to be. But as far as we know right now, we've seen footage from Jenin, which is only about 5 miles behind me. We've seen footage of fighting. Just about 10-15 minutes ago, we saw IDF vehicles passing through this checkpoint, likely to replenish stocks, but as of yet the fighting is continuing. We know that 8 Palestinians have been killed according to the PA Health Authority, but the fighting will continue for the next couple of days at the very least.
It certainly seems to be the case. Joe Brown with that update from the West Bank. Thank you so much for that report on the ground. Now, those are the IDF's moves, but for a better understanding of how Palestinians are reacting to the IDF's large-scale operation, we're joined by Palestinian security analyst Mohammed Najib, joining us from Ramallah in the West Bank. Mohammed, this is starting right now in Jenin, but are there concerns that this operation is soon going to move to other spots in the West Bank? Are there any Palestinians fleeing Jenin over these security concerns?
Actually, the Israeli military operation resulted right now in the murder of 9 Palestinians and the injury of another 40, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. And the Palestinian security forces that was operating in Jenin refugees camp and around the camp for the past 45 days forced to pull out from the area. And here also the Palestinian Authority condemned the operation and called on the Palestinian embassies around the world to address the leaders of those worlds to pressure Israel to stop the operation. Here, the Palestinians think that there are political motives behind this military operation at this time, and they said this is to please Smotrich as a part of the agreement between him and Netanyahu to reach the ceasefire in Gaza. And as you know, this is not the first Israeli military operation against Jenin refugees camp. During the past 3 years, Israel operated day and night and all the times, and massive operations took place, but it resulted in nothing. So right now, there is no one can understand why this time it will get better results than the previous military operations.
Mohammed, you mentioned the reaction from the Palestinian Authority, but what about Hamas? I've seen some statements coming out from the terror group trying to use this to try and garner some support in the West Bank, possibly building quote-unquote resistance. Is that likely to happen?
Actually, Hamas, since the start of the war in Gaza 15 months ago, was pushing to involve the 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank in fighting against Israel to decrease the pressure on Gaza, but it didn't happen that time. And now they saying that they blaming the Palestinian Authority, the security forces, for being surrounding Jenin and operating inside Jenin refugees camps, and call for the people to resist the Israeli military forces that invading or operating in Jenin refugees camps. And there are also a popular concern among the people here that maybe other Palestinian cities could be targeted by massive military operations like the defensive shield that took place in 2002 in the West Bank.
We'll certainly have to keep our eye on the West Bank, especially over these next coming days. Palestinian security analyst Mohammed Najib joining us from Ramallah. Thank you for your analysis.
Thank you.
Now, in addition to the IDF's latest counter-terrorism operation in Jenin, tensions are rising with settler violence in the West Bank. Overnight, dozens of masked settlers attacked Palestinian villages near Al-Funduq. Arlene Plagmeyer reports.
Dozens of masked settlers went into the West Bank village of Al-Funduq overnight, setting fire to cars. In addition, the settlers said to be also throwing rocks and attempting to break into homes. During the rampage, 2 Israelis were shot and seriously injured by a West Bank police officer. According to reports, the 2 masked men attacked the border police officer near a settler outpost close to the village and pepper sprayed him. The officer then opened fire. The IDF confirmed that settlers attacked security forces on the scene. The statement also read, "All violent riots harm security, and the IDF will not allow this." The men were taken to the hospital in critical condition. The police officer in question is suspended and will remain under house arrest until an investigation has been completed. The settler violence comes amid heightened tensions in the West Bank as 90 Palestinian prisoners were released in accordance with the Israel-Hamas ceasefire hostage deal. Meanwhile, Israeli far-right ministers have praised US President Donald Trump, who signed a decree right after his inauguration on Monday to lift sanctions on violent Israeli settlers, which were implemented by Joe Biden during his term. And so, amid a fragile Gaza ceasefire, the West Bank remains a volatile arena.
For more, we are joined in studio now by Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Doron Avital, former commander of the IDF Special Forces, as well as our I-24 News correspondent Robert Swift. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us on the Rundown this evening. Now, Doron, the IDF says right now its goals with this counterterrorism operation in Jenin, it's to preserve the IDF's freedom of action in the West Bank, neutralize terror infrastructure, and eliminate imminent threats. Is there this fear, and is it likely that there is going to be a rise in terror in the West Bank following this ceasefire in Gaza and the release of Palestinian security prisoners to this area?
I think it's less connected to the prisoners coming to the West Bank, because this, at least this number of prisoners, they are not really key terrorists, and we have to admit this. The issue is not that. The issue is that once there's a ceasefire in Gaza, Hamas, of course, is not committed to a ceasefire in the West Bank. Mm-hmm. So Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, and other organizations can operate as they operate in northern Samaria and Jenin. Now, the issue is we had this limited operation of the Palestinian Authority that was really working for a while, but then the IDF decided in a certain moment that this is not enough, and Jenin is really has a history of being a hub of terror. And we lost a soldier a day ago with some, the vehicle went over some explosive that was hidden underneath the road. So there was a point in creating this kind of operation, and let's see what would be the outcome.
It does say that it's going to be limited in scope, maybe last several days, but is that likely going to be the case for them to actually counter this terrorism?
You have to keep the tension over those places, but of course we don't. We hope that we succeeded to get those kasher weaponry, arrest whom we need to arrest, kill whatever terrorists we have to kill if they engage us with fire. So it's limited in a sense that it can take days or weeks, but of course we hope that in the end we can create some kind of quietness on the West Bank. I should mention, of course, that the ties between our security forces and the Palestinian Authority are important. Mm. And it would be important to resume the intimacy that used to be working in the past, and was lost a little bit.
Well, and right now the IDF, it's not only focused on combating the Palestinian terror, also this settler violence, Rob, that we're seeing sparking in the region. And so how does this also occupy the IDF's troops and energy trying to tamper that front?
The IDF has said that it takes up a lot of time and resources. And it's certainly it's not just a military issue, it's very much a political issue. We can see from the fact that this police officer has been questioned following this shooting that if it's settlers that are wounded by IDF or Israeli police fire, then it's a completely different scenario than, say, if a Palestinian were to be wounded or killed from the same fire. And this then ties into the fact that much of the Israeli government are themselves connected to the settler movement. Itamar Ben-Gvir, who just recently resigned and who has stated he'll be back, he lives in the West Bank, and he's hardly alone among that. And there are close connections between the political movement that was involved in the riots and elements of the government. And then clearly that means that there's less oversight there. It means that the IDF feels that its hands are tied, that it cannot just confront this sort of violence in the same way that, say, it would if it was Palestinian violence. And that makes for a far more complicated situation for the commanders on the ground to be handling.
And surely this is true once the current Minister of Defense entered this position, because Gallant was much more firm in terms of the settlers' riots in the West Bank, and I think Katz is eyeing into his base in the Likud party, and I think he's very
Well, we're going to talk more about some of the internal political developments here in Israel, but as we also talked about, this is all happening during a ceasefire in Gaza. In fact, it's been 2 days since former hostages Emily Damari, Doron Steinbrecher, and Romi Gonen returned back to Israel. And after 471 days in Hamas captivity, the 3 women are said to be in relatively good health, receiving treatment in Tel Aviv after being reunited with their families. Here's more.
Only told they were set to be released hours before, the nightmare is now over for 3 former Gaza hostages, Emily Damari, Romi Gonen, and Doron Steinbrecher. The 3 appeared in good health in a video released by the military after they were returned to Israel, later telling the media that they had hardly saw the light of day over the past 15 months, spending most of their time in captivity underground. Damari, who lost 2 fingers when she was shot on the day of her abduction, could be seen smiling and embracing her mother as she held up a bandaged hand, while Gonen could be heard telling her father over the phone that she survived. After an emotional meeting with their mothers in an IDF facility near the Gaza border, the 3 women were moved to Sheba Hospital near Tel Aviv for observation and treatment.
I'm happy to report that they are in stable condition that allows us and them to focus on what is the most important thing for now, is reuniting with their families. They are reunited with their families, and we will continue to monitor their clinical condition. This will take a few more days until we complete all the examinations that are needed.
The family members of the 3 former hostages gave a first statement to journalists on Monday since their daughters were returned the day before.
I'm delighted to be able to tell you that Emily is in high spirits and on the road to recovery. As you will have seen last night, she is an amazingly strong and resilient young woman. On behalf of Emily and the rest of our family, there are so many people who deserve a special thank you for working to bring her home. All of you have played a role in bringing Emily home. Thank you from the bottom of our heart.
Then also voicing a unified message.
I have one last request for you all. Please keep on fighting for the remaining 94 hostages who need to come home. There are too many other families who are waiting to hug their loved ones or bring them back for a proper burial.
For the latest, we go live now to our I-24 News correspondent, Balir Sladin at Sheba Medical Center in Ramat Gan. Balir, what is the update that we have as far as the condition of Romi, Emily, and Doron? Do we know exactly how long they're expected to stay in the hospital before finally being released home?
Well, we're yet to receive any official update from the hospital about the condition of Emily, Doron, and Romi. But just an hour ago, Mindy Damari, the mother of Emily Damari, has published a photo with Emily on X, on Twitter, formerly known as Twitter. And she said thank you to everyone in the UK and around the world who supported the campaign to bring Emily home. 94 hostages still need us, and she put out the photo with Emily without her bandages. For the first time, it could clearly be seen, of course, that she lost 2 of her fingers, but she was smiling beside her mother. That's adding to what we've heard yesterday right here behind me in the press conference when the sister of Doron said that she is doing well, she is strong and brave, but the road to recovery is still long. That's exactly what is expected. The road to recovery is still long for all 3 young women and, of course, the hostages that would be released in the coming few weeks.
Balir, that symbol you're talking about, Emily Damari with her hands held up, almost giving the rock on symbol. It's becoming a sign of these hostages as we do find out more about what they endured in Hamas captivity. Emily herself losing 2 of her fingers. And so what reports do we know right now as far as their time in captivity?
Well, there's a lot of censorship involving anything that we can say about their condition, but we have some testimonies that are cleared for publications. They were initially held together, but later were separated, so they didn't spend most of the time together, but they had been informed of their of the fact that they will be released just on the morning of Sunday. So on the same day that they were released, and they couldn't actually believe it, of course. And they are saying in their testimonies that they were in times in the humanitarian shelters designated for displaced Palestinians. So the designated humanitarian zone that the IDF has set in Gaza was used to hide hostages, and they spent significant time without daylight, so in underground tunnels, but also they were exposed to the television sometimes and even the radio, so they knew that their families survived, but they also knew that many of their friends they did not survive the October 7th attack, and they were able to see that their families and of course the supporters continued the fight in order to bring them a home that ultimately succeeded. And this is maybe the only thing that kept them with hope that they would be released at some point. So a lot of challenges and difficulties in these 47 days, but ultimately they are home right here in Sheba Hospital, and they would be released in the coming few days.
A positive message to end that on, and we're waiting to see their release. Balir Sladin, thank you for that update from Sheba Medical Center. Now, coming back here in studio, Hamas officials have claimed now that this Saturday 4 Israeli female hostages will be released in the second part of this, or second release as far as the second phase of this ceasefire that was just implemented goes. Robert, of the 7 remaining female hostages, 4 of them are these IDF female observation post workers, and it's likely that Israel will be paying a higher price for these female soldiers. Likely the Palestinian prisoners released being deported to Egypt and being deported to a different foreign country from there. What do we know about this process?
That's right. So with the female soldier hostages being released, it's due to be 50 Palestinian security prisoners that are going to be exchanged for them, as opposed to civilians where it was 30. Now, the security prisoners that we've seen released in the last couple of days, most of them were charged with fairly minor crimes. A lot of them were detained for incitement and stuff like this. But as Israel goes on to release increasingly senior, for want of a better term, individuals from prison, including those that are serving life sentences, part of the agreement is that these individuals will not be returned to the West Bank or to Gaza, as well as Qatar that you mentioned. Turkey is also expected, and possibly also Algeria, to be locations to where these people are exiled to following their release from detention in Israel.
So we'll certainly have to see exactly what does happen, possibly this weekend, as the second batch of hostages are hopefully released on time. Now, meanwhile, we do have an update on another hostage in Gaza, Russian-Israeli Sasha Truvanov. The Russian ambassador to Israel says Sasha is, quote, not entirely healthy, but will likely be freed in the next few weeks. The 28-year-old, who was kidnapped from Kibbutz Ner Oz with his mother, grandmother, and girlfriend, who were all released in the November 2023 hostage deal, he is on the list of 33 hostages set to be released in phase 1 of the current ceasefire. However, it's expected that women and elderly will be among the first released before the sick and wounded. Now, the Russian ambassador added Hamas made a firm promise to Moscow that Sasha would return to Israel, both alive and healthy. Now, a major announcement today from IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi. He will resign on March 6th over the October 7th failures under his watch. In his resignation letter to Defense Minister Israel Katz, Halevi wrote he, quote, takes full responsibility for the Army's failure on October 7th, 2023. The terrible failure of October 7th, 2023 haunts me every day and every hour. The Southern Command head, Major General Yaron Finkelman, followed Halevi's lead and also announced plans to resign. Here's what Halevi said after announcing his resignation.
I have no desire to hang on to my position. From a value-based perspective, it is not right for my term to be completed. And that is what I've said in the past. It is the right time to make decisions. I am investing everything I have in the war, have been for 473 days, in order to make sure that Hamas will be eliminated from a governing and military capability perspective, in order to return the hostages and in order to allow those who lived in the north, and in the western Negev to their homes.
Coming back here in studio now, Doron, 15 months after October 7th, why announce this resignation now? Is it believed that this is Halevi's choice, or is there some more behind this decision to possibly force his hand?
First of all, I think it goes both ways. I must admit that this is personal for me because Herzi was a deputy of mine. I actually brought him to this command, the Special Forces unit that I commanded. He was a great officer, great general, did great things in the army. And I think, about the issue about taking responsibility goes both ways. It goes on one sense, of course, resignation is always an option, but then once you're in the thick of the fire, you can't just resign. You have to continue. So I think once this terrible event of the 7th of October occurred, he understood that he has to take the army all the way through a point in which he can say that objectives were achieved. And I think many major objectives were achieved. For sure, the Northern Front. Now we know about Gaza. And I think an important note for Herzi was the hostage deal. The fact that there's a hostage deal taking place and it goes stage by stage. I think he felt this is a moment in which he can say something that happened under my command. It was a terrible debacle. I'm taking responsibility, as he said in the past. I had to take the army through those achievements. I commanded them bravely and succeeded to achieve those goals. But now it's a moment that I can resign, where my conscience is clear, and give the keys to the government. Clearly, of course, from the perspective of the government, there's also their consideration.
Many people in the army, many of these heads had already taken responsibility for these failures on October 7th. Many people in the Israeli politicians have yet to do so. Could this also push some of those politicians to now take responsibility?
I think it may, but there's no question there's no way to avoid the fact that there's a terrible tension between this current command of the IDF and the army and the security forces, including the head of the Shabak, even the head of the Mossad, where things are a little bit better, and the political echelon. And how this tension would evolve right now, it would be important to notice. We shouldn't forget that Gallant, the Minister of Defense, was part of the system that was really in line with the IDF, not with the political echelon. And now we have a different Minister of Defense who's basically belonging to political echelon. Israel Katz, and many of his consideration are political motivated. And it'd be interesting to see whom they would appoint. And what would it mean to the army?
On that note, Robert, we don't have much time now, but any ideas right now who might replace him?
Yeah, so Israel Katz has said that he's already looking at potential names. There are a few that come up immediately. There's Eyal Zamir, who is currently the Director General of the MOD, but there's also two other names. Amir Baram, who's the current deputy, would be one option to replace him, but Ori Gordon, who's the commander of Northern Command. Now, of all the fronts that Israel's waged in the last 15 months, it's the fight against Hezbollah which has been the most successful. So, for that reason, there's some you could see Ori Gordon as one possible candidate.
This is an interesting bet. Gordon, of course, is also a deputy of ours. I sent him to the office, of course, and Gordon really has proven himself in the Northern Front. But he doesn't have this excessive other positioning, and it would look hard for them to make a bet on him. Though, if it was up to me, I would pull him forward and rush him to the job. So I think right now the prospects are more Eyal Zamir, which more aligned with the old political
we'd like to hear your insights. Gentlemen, stay with us. We have to go out for a quick break here on The Rundown, but we'll be back in 3 minutes and continue to talk more about the political developments right here in Israel. Stay with us.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
bad posture. The ever-increasing hours we spend sitting, working, and even while trying to relax at home is twisting our vertebrae out of alignment and creating strain and pain on muscles, ligaments, and joints. A scientifically designed spine and back support device that uses precision biometric technology to perfectly align the back and spine for all-day comfort and support, creating perfect posture for your back every time you sit down. Now features extra-wide acupressure comfort pads as well as an extended height back panel for even more support, making it perfect for all body types. Also features a precision wing design that perfectly cradles your back and spine with amazing ergonomic support that leaves you feeling refreshed and energized even after sitting all day.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Welcome back to the rundown. On his first 24 hours in office, U.S. President Donald Trump wasted no time signing dozens of executive orders as soon as his inauguration was finalized. And some of those orders could impact Israel and its war with Hamas. Our correspondent Emmanuel Onora has more.
How confident are you, Mr. President, that you can keep the ceasefire in Gaza and conclude the three phases of the deal?
I'm not confident. That's not our war, it's their war, but I'm not confident. But I think they're very weakened on the other side.
That didn't stop now President Donald Trump from signing multiple executive orders that could impact directly or indirectly the status of the Israel-Hamas ceasefire. With little doubt as to which so-called side Trump is on, he signed 5 executive orders relating to Israel. One of the more notable executive orders Trump signed was the reversal of sanctions on Israeli settlers in the West Bank, something the Biden administration had placed great emphasis on during its tenure, concerned that it would destabilize the West Bank even more at such a sensitive time, but also U.S. interests. Far-right Israeli parties in the government support this move as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu plays a delicate balancing act between keeping his coalition satisfied while still securing a hostage ceasefire deal. Trump also restored sanctions on the International Criminal Court after the Biden administration reversed those same sanctions under Trump's previous term. This comes as the ICC issued arrest warrants in November for both the Israeli Prime Minister and the now former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. In another move, Trump placed a 90-day pause on U.S. assistance to foreign developmental programs to allow for the time to review their alignments to the new administration's policy, signaling in this case that it won't start up funding for organizations such as UNRWA after Biden signed a bill in March banning U.S. funding for the organization. And after months on calling for the deportation of, quote, pro-Hamas radicals, Trump authorized exactly that for visa holders who support what the administration deems hateful ideologies, terrorism, or national security threats to be sent back to where they came from.
For more, we go live now to Washington, D.C., where our senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim joins us from the U.S. State Department. Mike, dozens of executive orders. Trump certainly wasted no time in making many of his campaign promises come to light on day one. What should we make of this move?
Well, it's kind of this balance he's trying to strike right now between what the State Department and what his administration says is going to be an America-first foreign policy, and also making sure that it's protecting its allies around the world. One of the criticisms that Trump and his administration has of the previous administration in terms of foreign policies was that they were treating adversaries like enemies, adversaries like friends, and friends like adversaries. Trump and Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State, who's just down the hall right now addressing the employees here, said they need to change that friends need to be treated like friends, foes like foes. And I think we're seeing that in that some of these executive orders directly impacting Israel, like the revocation of the sanctions against settlers in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, in terms of freeing up any withheld or obstructed aid to Israel, is a part of these executive orders, but a small part. The large amount of those are domestically focused. And so we're seeing that kind of striking of the balance between the two right now, of having an America first approach, but realizing it's not America only per se. And I think we'll see more of that in the days and weeks, especially here in the halls of the State Department.
Well, Mike, when asked about the ceasefire that Trump is claiming credit for here in the Gaza Strip, Trump said he's not confident that this ceasefire will last all the way through all of these three phases. Now, as I said, this is the ceasefire the president is taking credit for. So if it does crumble under his watch, what does that mean?
I think he's trying to set the expectations where they should be right now. And, it's tough. As much as you want to be optimistic, as much as you want to see these hostages come out, and it was a day of largely of celebration, though some consternation because of the cost of it. But I think Trump is trying to make those viewing this right now pay attention to the fact that, listen, you're dealing with Hamas. It's a terrorist entity. They're not going to keep their word just because the spotlight might be shining on them. That may fall apart because of Hamas. I think it's also Trump being realistic in that he realizes that the pressure being applied on Israel right now by his envoy, Steve Witkoff, might be doing harm in some respects, in that Trump wants to see a Hamas-less Gaza the day after the war is over. Well, how do you achieve that if Israel is not able to go back in there and finish off the job that's really been stalled for quite some time right now, as we see still before the ceasefire the number of IDF deaths in Gaza? I think he's trying to kind of strike again that balance between saying, yes, this is my deal, I got this done, and also saying, well, some things are still going to have to change if what I want done is going to be done in the end, which is to have Hamas removed from power in Gaza. It's simply setting what I feel is a realistic rather than an optimistic tone going forward here in terms of how that ceasefire moves forward.
Certainly could be realistic. Now, Mike, you mentioned Steve Witkoff, part of Trump's envoy. Let's talk about how Trump's team is shaping up right now, because it was certainly a shock to some. Day one, he fired his ex-Iran envoy, Brian Hook.
Yeah, really interesting story here, and we've reached out to Brian Hook for comment, have yet to hear back. Hook was instrumental, one of the architects of that maximum pressure campaign on Iran here in the State Department during Trump's first tenure. He then went on into the think tank world, the analyst world, as many State Department employees do. By the way, he's still under protection because of threats from Iran. He still has his own personal security detail that's provided by the government. Now, he was hired back on board during the transition to lead the transition efforts right here at the State Department, and then suddenly fired essentially from his job. He was an appointee to the Wilson Center, which is a think tank here in Washington. He was a scholar there, but was appointed by Biden to that particular role. A really strange situation in that Trump just a few months ago obviously felt secure enough to appoint Brian Hook to lead the transition here at the State Department. There were obviously some disagreements along the way as to maybe hiring of some personnel or vision going forward here. Not a whole lot of clarity as to where or why those disagreements arose. But Hook now gone here from his role at the Wilson Center, and obviously gone from his role in any transition efforts here at the State Department, though, again, Marco Rubio officially taking over just hours ago as Secretary of State, entered the building just a little bit before the 1 o'clock hour here in Washington.
One day after Trump's inauguration, and certainly no shortage of news coming out of the United States. Senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim joining us live from the U.S. State Department. Thanks for the update. Now, the United States has also just freed an Afghan man convicted on charges of terrorism and drug smuggling in exchange for 2 American citizens held by the Taliban. Here's more details in this report.
Khan Mohammed, a convicted Afghan drug smuggler and Taliban member, is back in Kabul after spending more than 15 years in U.S. prison. Mohammed was sentenced to life imprisonment in 2008, making him the first person convicted under American narco-terrorism laws. The Department of Justice described Mohammed as a violent jihadist who sought to target U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan using rockets. His release is part of a prisoner exchange deal with the Taliban, in which 2 American citizens, Ryan Corbett and William McEntee, have been freed from detention. Ryan Corbett, detained by the Taliban since 2022, ran an NGO called Bloom Afghanistan, focused on boosting the private sector. McEntee's family has reportedly asked the U.S. government to keep his details private. Afghanistan's foreign ministry praised the agreement as a step toward normalizing ties with the United States.
The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan considers this exchange as a good example of resolving issues through dialogue, and is particularly grateful to the fraternal state of Qatar for its effective role in this regard. The Islamic Emirate views positively the steps taken by the United States that aid normalization and expansion of relations between the 2 countries.
The deal was reportedly finalized in the final hours of Joe Biden's presidency before Donald Trump took office. Corbett's family thanked both administrations for securing his release, but lamented that 2 other Americans, George Glesman and Mahmoud Habibi, remain detained in Afghanistan.
There was a heated debate today as the Knesset's Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee discussed the Haredi, or ultra-Orthodox, draft law, along with Defense Minister Israel Katz. Opposition leader Yair Lapid claimed Katz's ultra-Orthodox enlistment plan would turn him into a, quote, minister of evasion and refusal, as Katz is pushing a proposal that would see a gradual enlistment of ultra-Orthodox soldiers year over year until it hits 50% of eligible Haredim drafting in the year 2032. Well, ultra-Orthodox Shas MK, Yinon Azuli, defended Katz, saying he's not sure the army can absorb all the Haredim and wants to absorb all the Haredim. Plus, the decision should be made with the consent of the ultra-Orthodox community. Well, still with me in studio, I'm joined by Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Doron Avital, former commander of the IDF Special Forces, as well as our 24 News correspondent Robert Swift. Doron, what is at stake here? Is this truly the army overshooting with its draft enlistment goals, or are the Haredim creating real security issues by evading some of these draft orders?
This is a highly loaded question right now politically, and it will also affect the issue of who would be appointed as the chief of staff. Because, you know, Gallant, in many respects, the previous Minister of Defense, resigned over this issue because he insisted on a draft to all. And right now we have a minister that works out with the political parties of the Haredim, and we try to find with Bibi Netanyahu venue out of this difficulty. I would say the following in terms of the real issue at stakes. After this war, there's no possibility that there would be not one law to all in terms of drafting. On the other hand, I think it's not a simple issue to draft those Haredim and to find them effective in the battlefield.
They don't want to be there.
Not only
they're not going to do a good job.
Not only whether they have the proficiency, whether you can really maintain all the standards that require for keeping their way of life in terms of kosher food. You can't have. There's a military man here. You can't have 2 standards of food in the army. You can't say, well, I don't charge the enemy now because I didn't get the standard of kosherness that I need for my food. So I think in the end, Israel would have to have some reform, some kind of a new model of its drafting and a new model of its army where you have a very strong offensive army and an army that maybe does other duties more like protecting
some sort of
the
other
homeland.
Mandatory service.
Exactly. And I think basically when I was a member of parliament many years in the Kadima, we were trying to push the kind of a resolution, and we lost our political power because of this. So this is a problem that haunts Israel for years.
A long-standing issue.
And this will haunt us in the following months.
But we're really seeing the repercussions. At least some of the reserve soldiers are saying that they're feeling those repercussions right now because the weight on them has been unfair, specifically during this war, Robert.
It has, but due to the length of this war and the multi-front nature of it, what is being asked for reservists pales in comparison to previous years. And I think you see some of that anger in the clip that we'll play now as Jonathan Shalev made his opinion clear at the committee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do we have, I think...
Yeah, let's, we have a clip of him shouting at the Minister of Defence.
This is Israel, after all.
Of course, nobody says anything quietly. Let's have a listen to what he has to say.
יש חוק, אני בוגר יחידה קרבית, לחמתי שנה, על מה אתם מדברים פה? קירוב לבבות, ככה אתם תשיגו ניצחון? אני מייצג לוחמים שעכשיו בעזה בבוץ, אני איבדתי עשרות חברים של לוחמים, אתם יודעים מה אתם ראיתם אותי?
Now, something that's interesting in this whole dynamic for the government is the fact that it's putting two of Likud's key allies against each other. Now, there has been in previous years a political alliance between the religious Zionist groups and the ultra-Orthodox. But the religious Zionist groups, they do serve in the army. Many of them serve in the infantry. Many of them have been casualties in this war. And so these two groups who were previously allies and are key partners in Netanyahu's coalition, over the course of this war, they are increasingly going at loggerheads with each other.
A complicated issue that, as Doron is quick to point out, has been long-standing here in Israel, and so as we're seeing these debates, still very interesting. Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Doron Avital and our I-24 News correspondent Robert Swift, thank you for your analysis on all of the latest developments. Now, meanwhile, in Australia, they have just experienced yet another frightening anti-Semitic attack. A daycare center was set on fire in Sydney near a Jewish school and synagogue. Anti-Semitic slogans were graffitied on the walls outside the building, and although the daycare was significantly damaged, no one was injured in the incident. Australia's National Cabinet met to discuss the recent uptick in anti-Semitic attacks and said they created an anti-Semitic incident database to address this concerning rise following the most recent arson attack on a childcare center. For more, we are joined by the Israeli Special Envoy for Combating Anti-Semitism, Michal Kotler-Wunsch, former member of the Knesset Blue and White Party. Michal, thanks for being with us on the Rundown this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Now, this anti-Semitic incident database, I'm curious, in your opinion, if it's enough to actually combat this dangerous rise we're seeing in Australia. I mean, a childcare center was lit on fire. This needs to be taken seriously.
It is so far from enough that I can't begin to underscore. What we have seen in the past 16 months is a tsunami of anti-Semitism, including in Sydney, in Melbourne, not just targeting synagogues and schools and houses of worship, but individuals. The sense that there is this continued sort of one-off response, as if this is a one shocking event, and it is shocking, but it is no longer surprising, cannot suffice, including the convening of this cabinet, very haphazardly sort of calling it this morning and then convening it, and doing actually more of the same, which is words, condemnation. What we have to be clear on is it is time for action. It is time to make very clear that without the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition that enables to identify and combat all strains of what is an ever-mutating lethal virus that has been mainstreamed across Europe, across the United States, across Canada, and across Australia, if we do not approach this with the existential urgency of identifying and combating and implementing existing policies, existing legislation with action, and as I said, utilizing the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism that makes clear that anti-Semitism is not a problem of Jews. It is a problem of anti-Semites and of the places and spaces that allow them to fester, to spread, to permeate in what anti-Semitism predicts, which is a rising threat to all of humanity, to all that cherish freedom. And that is the urgency with which we need to approach what happened in Sydney last night.
So certainly we've been seeing this rise inside Sydney and inside Australia as the country as a whole. But meanwhile, we're also seeing this rise in anti-Semitism online, specifically this week following the hostage release deal and ceasefire in Gaza. Hamas once again being painted as martyrs just for keeping these hostages alive. And so how can we combat this anti-Semitism that we're seeing right now online?
Look, we have seen actually an intersection of, I'm going to say, several war fronts in which anti-Semitism has been mainstreamed in this way, in its current mutated strain of anti-Zionism, or the denial of Israel's very right to exist, in international institutions and human rights organizations like Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, in university campuses, and you are right, in online spaces. And we need to be very, very clear. As I said before, there is one single definition of anti-Semitism, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition, the result of a very long democratic process. It enables to identify and combat and flag all manifestations, all strains of this ever mutating virus. And if we fail to do so, and you're 100% right, when we have seen in the last 16 months in that mainstreaming is actually support for genocidal terror entities like Hamas, like Hezbollah, like the Houthis. And at the end of the day, what we need to be very clear on is what this enables and emboldens is those genocidal terror entities to do precisely what they did this week, which is extort the state of Israel for the release of 3 women stolen from their beds, releasing tens of genocidal terrorists.
Michal, I want to get your opinion also on this concerning gesture that's also gaining some widespread controversy online as well. It was in a speech following Donald Trump's inauguration. Elon Musk did what looks to be a Nazi salute. Now, it's hard to mistake this hand gesture for anything else. However, the Anti-Defamation League is defending Musk, saying this was just an awkward moment of enthusiasm. But is it dangerous at all that a symbol like this could become normalized?
I want to say something very, very clear. You know, the absurdity and the hypocrisy of those that are politicizing what is actually, and I, implore that everybody watch the entire video and not the picture that was taken and listen to the words that were said, which is, I send you my heart, and so on. I want to make very, very clear. Those political entities, including AOC and many others that are condemning what it is that they perceive to be what Elon Musk did last night, have been silent at the actual Heil Hitlers we have seen around the world, in Montreal, in the United States, in cities across Europe, in what are pro-Hamas, pro-genocidal terror, pro-Mein Kampf anti-Semitism around the world. So I want to make very, very clear. The politicization of anti-Semitism fuels it, enables it. And I would hope that, Elon Musk would actually clarify that that was, of course, not his intent. But again, the voices from which we hear these condemnations make very clear in the hypocrisy of their silence, of their support of genocidal terror, 100%, and in their complete ineffective understanding of what it is that has happened over the last 16 months, including in the United States.
That anti-Semitism should not be politicized, as you're saying. Michal Cutler-Wunsch, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, there is a new housing program in the Galilee that's offering lone soldiers much more than just a home. I went to take a look at this new option. Here's more in this next report.
Being here is really for the future of Israel and also for our students, because it all starts with the individual.
That's the message coming from the Hanaton Educational Center, located in the Galilee.
The Hanaton Educational Center really wants to empower and educate the next leadership of the state of Israel as a pluralistic leadership.
That's what they teach at their Mechina, or pre-army gap year program, at Kibbutz Hanaton.
Everybody who's here is here because they're looking for more, and they want to be here, and they know that they have an impact and they have a responsibility to the Israeli society.
While the Mechina is in its 13th cohort, there's a new mission also in the works.
Because the connection between the Jewish people and the Jewish state for us is so natural, and we need that connection because we're that togetherness is who we are, we decided to build a parallel program, really, beside the Mechina, for lone soldiers.
A lone soldier is an immigrant who enlists in the Israeli military without any family in the Jewish state.
I came as a Jew from overseas, and I knew that I wanted to strengthen my identity, and I wanted to learn Hebrew and to know what it was to be Israeli before I drafted into the army. That was my dream, was to draft into the army, and I knew that I had to do the preparation.
Morty participated in the Mechina before enlisting in the army, but when he was a lone soldier, there was no option for housing.
So 4 years on, sometimes I forget how hard it really was. How hard it really is to finish the army, leave the army Thursday night at 8 o'clock, have to go somewhere to some family that I don't really know at the edge of the country, come with all my laundry like here, dump it on them, and then they make dinner for you, so you have to be nice and you have to sit and all that, and it's all great, but really all you want to do is go to sleep and not talk to anyone.
Without a home base, he was couch surfing nearly every weekend during his time in the IDF.
My story, I really am thankful and appreciative of all those people who did help me, because without them it would be impossible. But looking back, I mean, I can only dream about a framework that would guide me from the day I landed to the day I was released, and to help me reintegrate again all those things that I did by myself the hard way.
Well, lone soldiers are released from the army, they stay lone. They stay lone, lone release soldiers. They don't have a family here, they don't have a home here. It's important for us to accompany these lone soldiers when they're released from the army, to accompany them 10 years ahead, 20 years ahead. We want those lone soldiers who want to be a part of Israel. We know how hard it is.
The vision for the new Lone Soldier Initiative came to light with the help of a former lone soldier.
So Michael Greenberg came here as a lone soldier in the late 60s, 68, and joined the paratroopers. Being a lone soldier, he wanted to build those homes for those lone soldiers, and he was a conservative Jew. So it just came all together here when he came here.
That's one of the things that makes the Hanaton Educational Center so unique.
There's right now only two solutions. You go to a secular kibbutz or to an Orthodox kibbutz, which, by the way, is great, is magnificent, but there's more to that. There's more richness to that. You have to talk about a Jewish perspective doesn't hold only extremes, but can hold a wide range of identities, whether you're secular or reform or conservative or Orthodox or modern Orthodox or not modern Orthodox. So we want to open that, and we want to give people a sense of home.
This is the first lone soldier housing for conservative and reform Jews, a middle ground offering options for everyone.
We decided to really build them a physical home, and with this community would give them their spiritual home.
I think the kibbutz offers like a more small-scale opportunity to integrate into society. It also offers community, which is something that a lot of people look for no matter where they are.
Providing a much-needed community to the lone soldiers leaving theirs behind to serve the state of Israel. Reporting from the Galilee, Nicole Zedek for I-24 News.
Certainly a beautiful new initiative there, and a beautiful location as well there in the Galilee through the Hanaton Educational Center. Happy I got to go up there and visit it myself. And on that note, we wrap up this latest edition of The Rundown here on I-24 News. I'm Nicole Zedek. Thanks so much for joining us this evening.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Tirando ferro, os metais e da tecnologia. Esse grande é tradição.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
The 7th of October set in motion a chain of events. Today, Israel's enemies are severely weakened, but not defeated, and the balance of power is shifting. This region never rests. And for its own survival, Israel needs to keep its finger on the pulse. If you want to better understand, if you want to hear voices you won't hear elsewhere, then tune in daily to Middle East Now on I24 News.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Hello and welcome to Jewish World Weekly on I24 News. I'm Emily Francis. Each week we focus on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interest here in Israel and throughout the diaspora, the global Jewish community. And we start with our top 5 items in the Jewish world presented by Nicole Zedek. Nicole.
Thanks, Emily. Here are the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. A lawsuit in D.C. was filed against Joe Biden's administration for a, quote, unconstitutional sanctioning of American-Israeli settlers. Levi Yitzhak Pilant and Issachar Man had their assets frozen after the Biden administration accused them of undermining peace, security, and stability in the West Bank, including leading settler attacks on Palestinians. The lawsuit claims they are being targeted for being Jews who are living on Jewish land. A Columbia University professor claims she was fired due to her pro-Palestinian views. Law professor Catherine Frank was found by an internal investigation to have incited discrimination against Israeli students who were suspended during the pro-Palestinian campus protests back in May. The university confirmed that Frank had, quote, accelerated her planned retirement. A pro-Palestinian rally in London is attempting to defy police restrictions by marching past a synagogue. The Metropolitan Police placed restrictions on the march, which is set to finish at the BBC headquarters, because Jewish leaders and lawmakers raised concerns about the safety of congregants. Talks with the leaders of the rally failed as they refused to change their route. One of Syria's last remaining Jews has died at the age of 92. The chief rabbinate of Syria announced that Hadia Sita passed away, leaving only 8 Jews in a country that used to have one of the largest Jewish populations in the world. May her memory be a blessing. And finally, an Israeli aid organization has called on diaspora Jews to help rebuild Israel's northern communities. The One Heart organization says, well, they've already mobilized 5,000 people to help restore the communities that were targeted and evacuated during the Israel-Hezbollah war. They are looking for 10,000 more to help the thousands of displaced Israelis return home. Now, those are your top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Back to you, Emily.
Death toll continues to rise in the ongoing wildfires ripping through several Los Angeles neighborhoods. Authorities say dozens have been killed and many more are still missing. Despite heroic, unrelenting efforts by firefighters, heavy winds are expected, with fears mounting that the flames could once again wreak havoc in more neighborhoods. Fire authorities say over 40,000 acres have already burned in the blazes and are still not contained. The sleepy community of Pacific Palisades has been utterly destroyed by these fires, leaving thousands of families homeless, including the rabbis of Pacific Palisades Kehilloth Israel Synagogue. Joining us now from Pacific Palisades is Rabbi Amy Bernstein, the senior rabbi of Kehilloth Israel in Pacific Palisades. First of all, thank you for being here, and I'm sorry it has to be under such dire and tragic circumstances. And I want to personally send, my respect for the fact that you yourself, being the leader of a Jewish community and also being the victim of losing your own home, I cannot imagine the waves of emotions you're feeling.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. Obviously, ranging from incredible gratitude to be here. We're the Jewish people. We know that life is the most important thing. So to be here at all is, I'm grateful, and holding at the same time the incredibly hard, awful, devastating, existential loss of everything that was testimony to my past, to my parents' past, to my own history that I was going to have to give to my daughter, so that she had things, touchstones back to those generations and to those stories, and that's all gone. So it's
wow,
it's from gratitude to pain, pretty quickly.
Well, and not only having that kind of pain, but it's still ongoing. The nightmare is still ongoing. The fire is still not out. And you have a community of also people that are technically homeless, and you don't have a synagogue yet to go back to, but we did see the images that was sent by Cantor Frankel of your being allowed into the synagogue, and the, I guess, the surprise and the miraculous fact that the synagogue is still standing. I imagine that just added to the emotion, but this time a little bit different than your home, huh?
Yeah, it did. It was very emotional to go there. We got a pass, through Jacob Sobroth with his press pass. We were able to enter the synagogue, and there's just no words for, the incredible, overwhelming feeling that home, our home, is still standing, because everything else for many of us is gone. So to see that KI was standing when so much around it was burned to the ground was an incredible feeling of safety in this catastrophe where nothing was safe, remained in so many ways.
It really is a miracle in so many ways, but at the same time, you also, you were saying before when we spoke, I mean, there were windows open, you came to a lot of debris and soot, and that's, even more impactful, knowing that it's coming from homes of people that you know and yourself.
Yeah. So that soot, those ashes on the floor of the synagogue is the life of our community in terms of everything that we had and had built, many of us over a lifetime. And to see that on the floor was profound. And this is the story of the Jewish people. That is not lost on me, that this is the story of the Jewish people for 3,000 years, is that it burns to the ground and we somehow clean it up and start again. And that's what we do over and over and over and over again. And we're going to have to do it this time too. And we will. That is who we are. Resiliency is baked into who we are. It's hard. The Jewish people has never shied away from saying how hard the work is to rebuild and how hard it is to maintain energy and hope and, motivation and all of those things. But we also are a people who just digs deep when we have to, and we do it. We rebuild. And as my colleague, Ed Feinstein, said so beautifully in a talk a few years ago, we are the 10th of Av Jews. The Jews who rebuild after the 9th of Av. Start on the 10th of Av.
Yep.
And that's what we're doing. We're already starting to figure out how to be together in this, how to build momentum and some kind of forward energy, because it's going to take so much work. But the work has begun. This is the 10th of Av.
Wow, it's just, it's a very interesting analogy that you're making. And then also the 10th of Av, then you have the 14th of Av, and you have Tu B'Av. I guess this is also part of the journey of the Jewish people. Every holiday, it's we're depressed, we're happy, we're depressed, we don't eat. I mean, this is also in a way where comedy started as well, back in the days of the Borscht Belt and beyond. There's just something about the spirit that's just part of the glow of what we have done over so many years. So talk about that community and how those that have lost their homes and the fact you have this central location will provide a sanctuary during this time of grief and mourning.
We came through COVID living in lots of different places and somehow holding together as a community. So that really did tell me it's possible to stay together as a community, even though we can't be together, all of us together in the same room when we want to be. So we have technologies from COVID that are going to help. That are going to help us be able to stay together. So when we had the service Friday night at Sinai Temple, even though there was over 250 of us in the room, there were way more online. And so, people now, we have the technology in place to allow people to join us from wherever they are. Yeah. And we're going to need that. And I think without the structure of KI standing, I don't know, but what I know is we have something to show people to say, we're coming back and we'll have a place to be together again. The place that we've celebrated and mourned so many times on so many occasions. We'll have it again. So that symbol is really important, I think, for people to believe it's possible for us to rebuild.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you so much, Rabbi Bernstein, for joining us, given that you're right in the thick of it and taking care of so many people. And we're sending you endless love and prayers for getting through this challenging time.
Thank you so much. And thank you, all of you who have expressed your care and concern for us. It makes us aware that we are part of a people. Then truly we are part of a people. People are reaching out from everywhere. And there's something so moving and so comforting about that. So thank you all for your care and wanting to hear from us.
Commemorations were held in Paris on January 9th to mark the 10-year anniversary of the Ipak Kasher attack in Paris, in which an ISIS-affiliated terrorist sieged a kosher supermarket, killing 4 people inside. This was the deadliest terror attack against Jews in France since 1982. And now, 10 years later, the anti-Semitic threat in France is not going away. Here's more from I-24 News correspondent Joe Brown.
As the French public marks the anniversary of the January 2015 terror attacks at the offices of satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo and at a kosher supermarket 2 days later, the prevalence of anti-Semitism in today's French society is impossible to ignore.
Who would have thought 10 years on that there would have been such an upsurge in anti-Semitic acts in France? Since the 7th of October 2023, there has been a more than 3-fold increase in anti-Semitic incidents. I would also like to say to those listening to us that our Jewish compatriots represent less than 1% of the French population, yet they are the victims of 57% of racist, anti-religious, and anti-Semitic acts. 1% on the one hand, 57% on the other.
On January the 9th, 2015, Malian-born French immigrant Amédi Koulibaly entered the Hypercacher supermarket in France, having just killed a police officer the day before. In his 4-hour-long siege, he killed 4 people and held another 15 hostage before police entered and killed him. He said it was in response to France's actions in the Middle East, and during the siege, he demanded that the perpetrators of the Charlie Hebdo attacks remain unharmed. But despite the largest anti-Semitic attack in France in over 30 years, the sentiment in the country is that things have not changed.
What happened here 10 years ago had causes that have not been resolved. We may have overcome the jihadist episode 10 years ago, but we know that Islamism is still on the rise in our country, that it continues to pose a daily threat to French people and to French Jews in particular.
A recent poll by French magazine Le Point shows that 1 in 5 young French people think that the Jews should leave the country, while 16% of total respondents said that Jews are to blame for the rising anti-Semitism in France. And anti-Semitic incidents are, indeed, rising. In the aftermath of the October 7th attacks, 2023 saw the highest number of anti-Semitic attacks recorded in France, with multiple incidents in 2024 suggesting that that unfortunate record could be broken.
The anti-Semitic tsunami of hatred for Israel and the Jews that we have been experiencing since October 2023 reminds us that what happened 10 years ago is obviously engraved in the collective memory, in the flesh of our country, but compels us not only to commemorate, but to fight against this hatred, against Islamism, and against all those who attack the values of the Republic and of France.
Aliyah applications from France increased threefold in the 12 months following October the 7th. So whilst the French public mourns alongside them, the third largest Jewish community in the world is keeping a firm eye on its future.
Global anti-Semitism is reaching a fever pitch around the world, and a new Anti-Defamation League poll reveals that nearly half of adults worldwide hold elevated levels of anti-Semitic beliefs and attitudes, which is an estimated 2.2 billion people when the world Jewish population is only 16 million. Joining us via Zoom from the U.S. is Marina Rosenberg, Senior Vice President of International Affairs at the Anti-Defamation League and former Ambassador of Israel to Chile. Thank you very much for being here. Sorry it has to be under these circumstances.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.
And indeed, I wish we had some better news.
This is nothing surprising. We know the rising tide of anti-Semitic violence behavior has, just been making headlines since the October 7th massacre and, of course, the over year-long war. But the fact that 46% of adults in the world hold these beliefs is quite alarming.
Yes, indeed. It's alarming and not surprisingly, exactly as you said. We've been seeing the number of anti-Semitic incidents going up, especially post-October 7th. And it's not surprising, to me at least, that the number of people that are harboring anti-Semitic attitudes is also on the rise. And basically what we're seeing here is a global emergency of anti-Semitism. We're seeing it from the Middle East to Europe, from North America to Africa, and it can come from anyone and anywhere.
Yeah, also given Jews, let's just think about it. In the world, Jews only represent 0.2% of the population. So how does the research of the ADL explain this ongoing escalation and problem, that we know of has existed for thousands of years? I mean, such a small minority, yet the majority is continuing to call for a lot of bad things to happen to the Jewish people.
Yes, indeed. So there are a few explanations to what is going on in this tsunami of hate and anti-Semitism. So first of all, the post-October 7th, we have been seeing a rise in anti-Semitism in a very alarming way. And this is not just since Israel entered Gaza, but this was immediately post the atrocities of Hamas in Israel. We've seen it here in the US, we've seen it in Europe, and of course in the Middle East and other regions. Secondly, social media. ADL's Global 100 was launched 10 years ago in 2014. And back then, social media was not as prevalent as it is today. And today, though it's a very helpful tool, it's also a helpful tool for the haters and the anti-Semites, and it emboldens them to share publicly their anti-Semitic views. And thirdly, what we call is the Al Jazeera effect. in press and media around the world, where channels like Al Jazeera, but also Iran-backed channels like Press TV in Europe and Hispan TV in Latin America spread intentionally disinformation and anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist tropes against Jews and against Israel. And one important thing that comes from this survey that we just did at the end of 2024, 10 years after we launched it, is that the younger generation, the 18 till 34-year-old, harbor more elevated level of anti-Semitic attitudes. And basically what we're seeing around the world is a demographic time.
Yeah, and that is what is really so scary. I mean, we've seen it unfold before our very eyes on campuses, encampments, anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian marches. And the fact is that young people, because of social media, are also impressionable, don't have the experience of, listening to your sources, trying to see if it's true or not. How do you stabilize this out of control wildfire? I mean, what can actually be done, if anything?
Well, there's some good news coming out of this Global 100 survey, and it's that the majority of the adult population in the world, 57%, think that anti-Jewish hate is a major problem in the world. And why is it important? Because this means that governments and international organizations should take this support of the majority and take concrete, innovative actions against anti-Semitism. And this is why ADL calls for a whole-of-society approach in fighting anti-Semitism, not just the governments, but academia, civil society, the private sector, and everybody in the general public should stand against anti-Semitism and innovate with new concrete steps against it.
Wow, thank you very much for your comprehensive summary of this situation. I'm Marina Rosenberg, Senior Vice President of International Affairs at the Anti-Defamation League. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
With a rich Jewish history in Syria dating back centuries and one of the oldest synagogues in the world in ruins, the rabbi of the Syrian Jewish community of Israel is taking matters into his own hands to breathe new life into the over 2,000-year-old Jobar synagogue. The son of Syria's last chief rabbi and the current chief rabbi of the Syrian community, Rabbi Binyamin Hamra, has penned a letter to Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Shara, urging him to preserve the country's rich Jewish history. And we are happy now to be joined via Zoom by Rabbi Hamra. First of all, thank you for being here. And tell us more about your father's time as chief rabbi in Syria from 1976 to 1994. What was his experience there at that time before he left?
First of all, nice to meet you. I'm happy to be with you. My father, may he rest in peace, was the chief rabbi from 1976 to 1994. Before that, in 1972, he was an assisting rabbi to the chief rabbi who served before him. And from age 16, he was a teacher in a Torah school. And then from age 18, the principal. And so slowly he progressed. In the period of my father, he always told us that life in Syria was very enjoyable. It was permitted to practice Judaism. The synagogues and all of our traditions and customs, it was possible to do so. Under Syrian law, it was permitted for each religion, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, to practice its customs, and so we did. We observed the Sabbath, and the holidays were special. But at the same time, there was also great complexity and difficulty, because we were frightened, perhaps to do or say something that could, God forbid, harm us, despite never having any ill intent towards anyone. That's how life was. On the one hand, great fear. On the other, a really good atmosphere. That's how we grew up. In those periods, there were limitations. From the 1970s, you couldn't go more than 3 kilometers from the Jewish quarter, called Harat al-Yahud, but slowly the restrictions eased. They eased restrictions on women who wanted to get married. For that end, you could send them to America. And so it progressed, slowly, until 1992, when my father received from Hafez el-Assad permission that all Jews in Syria, be they in Damascus, Aleppo, or Kamishli, could go all over the world, but not, of course, to Israel.
What would be, you did write a letter to Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Shara. You mentioned that toppling Assad, a historic move due to God's providence. What would be ideal for him to do, not only for the Jewish community and the synagogue, but moving into the future?
What I wrote in the letter, and I don't get into internal Syrian matters, whether it's this government or the other, my late father tried to do everything for the Jewish community in Syria when he was chief rabbi of Syrian Jews in Israel. He never did anything against any Syrian government, and we're also not going to interfere in internal Syrian affairs. What we want is for everyone to live in health and peace, and that it will be good for everyone. From this point of view, I, as a rabbi, who knows whatever is going on in the world is through God's supervision, I believe that this historic process happened in the way that even the current government there seeks peace and dialogue, and that's what we expect. Like in all other countries, such as Iraq, Egypt, and Morocco, they all safeguarded the Jewish tradition, and those of other religions, be it Islam or Christianity, so we expect. We see that they really do want this, and we really hope and expect it to happen.
The Syrian community in the diaspora remains very strong. I imagine it's also very personal as well for them to help give the support to rebuild what is left of this over 2,000-year-old synagogue.
First of all, we truly want to say that from here, we lost one of the most well-known Jewish figures in Syria, Hadia Sitar. She passed away a week ago. This generation is indeed disappearing, but as you say, the Syrian Jewish community in the diaspora is very big, numbering hundreds of thousands of people. It's a very honourable community, and we're in contact with all possible figures, be they in America or Mexico, wherever they are, so we can make the best possible progress. We really expect and wish that from this moment we can come visit on the best possible side.
Also, are you, as well as Syrian expats throughout the diaspora, optimistic that the new regime will protect these priceless sites? And is there a hope of one day being in a place where people could actually go to Syria and reconnect with their roots and their great-grandparents and grandparents where they grew up?
As I said earlier, we hope the new government has its face towards peace, open to dialogue and understanding. Just as in all countries, they keep these things, the traditions. We expect and wish that with the new government, they will honour our traditions and customs. Just as we knew how to live in Syria with our Arab neighbours, and so far we are in contact with them outside of Syria. We yearn for the days that we will be able to come to see where our fathers and forefathers gave their souls to Judaism. That, with God's help, is what we expect.
I just want to add, in Arabic,
اليهودية اللي بأنحاء العالم إنه بنتأمل إنه نحن نحسن ونيجي نزور عن قريب جدا وتحياتي وتقديري لكلهم وإن شاء الله بعزات الشام بنشوف كل العالم بطريقة منيحة وطريقة تبع السلام وكله بيكون منيح والشام بعزات الشام.
And with God's help, everyone in the world will live in health and peace, because ultimately, and as our sages have said, there is no better blessing than peace. That is to say, every blessing in the world, be it Jewish, Muslim, or Christian, peace, that is the blessing. And if peace is the blessing, that is what we expect, and with God's help, we'll reach full redemption.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Rabbi Benjamin Hamra, Chief Rabbi of the Syrian community. Toda. Thank you all so much for joining us on Jewish World Weekly. I'm Emily Francis. We sure hope you enjoyed it. And of course, be sure to tune in again next week for